Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast, where we explore your hidden thoughts and desires, revealing your greatest drop the mic moments. Now, here's your host, Art Costello.
Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast. Today, I am honored and thrilled to have Michelle Dickinson on our show. She is a professional. She is a passionate mental health advocate, a TED speaker, and a published author. A memoir entitled Breaking Into My Life. After years of playing the role of Caregiver, Michelle embarked on her own healing journey of self-discovery. Her memoir offers a rare glimpse into a young girl's experience living and loving her bipolar mother. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad to have you, and I'm excited for you to tell us your story.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So, my story. Let me synthesize it. So I grew up with a mother who had bipolar disorder. And for people that don't know what bipolar disorder is, it's someone who has a mental illness where they have rapid cycling from extreme depression to extreme mania. So I grew up in that environment with my mom's constant changing from mania to depression. And so that really shaped who I was. And I grew up in that environment. And I understood a little bit about what that looked like. So I found myself giving a TED Talk about my experience, and I got really connected to wanting to really share my story in my memoir because of the difference it had made for people who heard my story and the impact it could have just to humanize what mental illness is, to have people understand it and fear it less.
Can you kind of tell us, and I actually have a lot of experience in bipolar because I worked in the mental health industry and the early years where they called it manic depressive.
Yes.
And can you kind of tell us about what it was like for you as a child dealing with somebody who has got these extreme manic phases and then the extreme opposite of a depressive phase?
Yeah. So the manic episodes my mom had were wonderful. She was in a great mood. She was upbeat. I compared it to like Disney. Like we would go shopping. Nothing was off the table. She could buy whatever she wanted. It was like I was experiencing her mania with her. And it was wonderful because she was happy. And that was so welcomed after her deep, dark, depressive days where she would just cry uncontrollably for days and for hours. And there was nothing I could do to relieve her sadness. So, that was the priority, right? Mom's well-being was the priority. So I quickly learned as a little girl that my needs were to go on the shelf, and everything revolved around trying to keep my mom just stable and not too depressed and not too excited.
How did that make you feel?
Boy, how did that make me feel? I didn't know any different until I got older and, went through my own self-discovery, my own therapy, that it wasn't normal for a little girl to try to console her mother or try to distract her from her sadness when she was depressed. Like I thought I literally had control over her upsets. How did I feel? I probably felt invisible because there were a lot of things that I wished I could share with my mom, with those adolescent years when you're going through just trying to figure out your body and trying to figure out boys. I wish I had a mom who was similar to like my girlfriend's moms that I would see, and I just didn't have that.
Yeah, that was my thought. I know how, because when I was young, I was in essence abandoned. But it was not the traditional abandonment where I was left on the firehouse step. I was put from urban New Jersey to a small little farm in upstate New York that had no neighbors within 3 miles. And even those that were 9 miles away. And my parents kind of dissolved and separated and didn't pay any attention to us kids. So I know the invisible feeling that it is. And I know, I always tell the story about when I was in high school, I had gone and asked a girl at school, prettiest girl in school, to go to the school dance with me. And she told me she wouldn't go anywhere with me because I stunk, that I smelled. And it hurt my feelings so bad because no one ever told me about deodorant. No one ever told me about that. And here I was.
So basic
and all that. So I know the invisibility. Was your mom undiagnosed or diagnosed at that point in your life?
My mom was diagnosed, in fact, and it was a term we were all very familiar with. And she was treated and took herself off of treatment when she started to feel better.
It just seems very common with manic depressives. As soon as the minute they start feeling better, they think they've got a hold of it and they go back into the manic phase and they lose control.
The need to have closure in any given situation is sheer human nature. And when it comes to romantic relationships, this desire skyrockets. Has your previously failed relationship left you in immense pain? It's not uncommon for people to shy away from a new relationship after their first one fails miserably. The fear of the unknown makes them hide in a shell to prevent any future heartbreak. Relatable? Despite wanting to love and be loved, you can't take the plunge if your mind and heart are still locked somewhere in the past. Maybe you aren't aware of the power of releasing the past, or perhaps you don't know how to do it. Art Costello in his online course teaches the art of moving on from bad places to happier, more stable ones. This course can change your life for good, helping you beat all kinds of negativity on the road to eternal bliss. Sign up now before the gloominess gets the better of you at expectationacademy.com.
What were your high school years like for you then, dealing with that?
And so this is why I talk to people like you, right? Because there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of embarrassment. And I spent a lot of energy, emotional energy, concealing the story of my mom and the experience of our home life as a secret, because there was a lot of shame, right? So that took a lot of energy, go to school, pretend everything's okay after being out of school for like a week and a half, taking care of my mom because she's so fragile. She can't be left alone, but she's not sick enough to be hospitalized. So that fell on me because my dad, couldn't stay home from work with her. So it was a challenge because I didn't want people at school. I didn't want anyone to know what I was dealing with at home. And I had to muscle it on my own. So it was hard. It was really hard until I think, I write a chapter in my memoir about finding my youth group. And when I found my youth group, I found the safety to finally share with this community what I was dealing with. And then I felt surrounded by support, which is what I think I had always wanted, was just someone to just be like, yeah, man, I get it. That's rough what you're dealing with, and you're not alone, and we're here for you.
Was your dad supportive to you through this process?
My dad was doing the best he could. So my dad was as supportive as he could have been, but he was the sole provider. So he was really consumed with long days of working as an engineer for IBM. And, there were some nights when he had to work. And so he took care of her to the best of his ability, and he supported me as much as he could. But it's kind of unspoken that, his work was his priority.
Yeah, in dealing with your mom, I know that when I was working in the mental health field with people that had manic episodes, there was some really hilarious episodes that happen and stuff that's fun. And I know it's tragic, but yet out of some tragedies, we find these great joys and great memories. Do you have any memories of your mom doing something that you could share with us that it was just so fun for you that?
Yeah. I mean, my mom had her moments, right? Like when, she was Irish. She was like 100% Irish. And we used to laugh and just be like, you just never knew what would come out of her mouth. Like she'd say the things that everyone was feeling in the room. And you'd just be like, yes, someone said it. There were family affairs where we would go to where my mother was the life of the party. Like everyone would be laughing because she had this energy about her that would just generate so much fun. And people were terrified to upset her. So you can only imagine the dynamics in the family, right? Like, okay, let's keep her laughing because God knows if you crossed her, it was not going to be pretty. So she was just a very vibrant, fun person when she was manic, and like just would say anything. And that was fun. That actually was fun until, obviously it went a little too far and then we're like embarrassed. But until that point, it was great.
It reminds me of my dad. My dad was a little Irishman, about 5'7" and about 130 pounds. So stoic and quiet. But the minute you put beer in him, the minute he had a beer, he just went crazy. I mean, it was like you let out this comedian, and he was hilarious. I mean, I can remember as a child going down the street in Dumont, New Jersey, going down the street in this old 51 Chevy Woody kind of station wagon we had. And my sister and I were in the back seat of the car. My dad didn't drive because he had been in a bus accident in New York City, and he had this huge phobia of driving a car. So he would always be the passenger. Well, when he'd have beer and we'd be going down the road, he'd be hanging out the window yelling, "They're kidnapping me. They're kidnapping me." We were going to the drive-in to see The King and I at the drive-in. And I can remember my mother being so mad at him. She used to get furious, but he was hilarious. He did.
It's so funny.
Oh, God, I just remember so many funny things. So, but anyway, after you got out of high school and all that, what did you do then?
So I write about this in the memoir as well. You know, we gravitate to what is familiar to us. My mom was also, when she was really sick, she was abusive, right? So she was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, and very controlling and very manipulating. So that was my conditioning as a little girl. And so I gravitated to that in the first marriage that I had. I met someone who was very similar to her, and my therapist coined as the male version of my mother. And I left our home because at the time I wanted to go away to college, but my mom and dad didn't want me away. They wanted me at home. I think selfishly to look after my mom because she was still unstable. And so the only way I could leave the house was to get married. So I met a man that I had worked with who was very similar to my mom, and I gravitated to that and eventually married him and eventually divorced him. So I had left the home in my early 20s at that point, and I still had responsibility of my mom. My mom was still reaching out to me. I was still, trying to do my part to look after her, even though I wasn't living at home anymore. She still really manipulated me into spending time with her, coming back and looking after her. So it's tough.
Yeah, people don't realize that even though when a caregiver leaves the company of somebody, they actually work very hard at pulling you back into that. I've got an odd question for you.
Sure.
When you got married
mm-hmm.
and you were going down the aisle
mm-hmm.
or however it was, did you know that you were marrying for the right or wrong reason at the time?
Hell no. I was too young and I was too disconnected. I just saw this as a way out maybe, and I didn't see any of the flaws in him. I was unable to see any of the similarities. I couldn't see the similarities between my mother and him until many years later. It was just familiar. It was like, okay, so this guy's going to control me, manipulate me. There's going to be emotional abuse. Yeah, feels like an easy chair, very comfortable. And you don't know better,
Yeah. How old were you?
I want to say it was just legal. I want to say it was either 20 or 21 when I got married.
Has anyone ever inspired you to discover a happier, healthier, and more fulfilled you? It is a magical experience, isn't it? Inspiration is indeed very powerful, yet it's often undermined. It can lift you from the ground to the sky in no time. Have you ever thought about returning the favor by inspiring the people around you? If you don't think you have it in you, we have good news for you. Art Costello's online course has everything you need to learn to supercharge yourself and shape your character into a powerful personality. Get ready to discover your strengths and unleash the creativity within. Don't believe it? Check it out yourself by signing up for this life-changing course at expectationacademy.com. That's expectationacademy.com.
I'm always interested in what people's thoughts are because in my work, I have found a lot of people are very aware that they're making the wrong decision at the time. And I'm so into following your expectations, and your core expectations, what you have or what you live by, not to what the expectations of other people. So,
right.
So it's important to me.
Mm-hmm. And it was clouded. You got to get to, it was clouded over by this fairy tale wedding that my mom and dad gave me, right? I think that's what happens with young girls. You're enamored by this gorgeous day and this, big to do that you can't really have the clarity and, validate that what you're doing is for the right reasons because you're so consumed by all of that.
Yeah, well, you get caught up in the moment.
Yeah.
The thrill of the planning and all of that just goes into it. And it's probably one of the best reasons that pre-marriage counseling is the best to really help identify some of the differences because, listen, marriage is no piece of cake. It is not this fairy tale thing that we're sold in the movies and everything else. It takes hard work, commitment, and loving each other, just seeing beyond all of the fairy tale part of life and all that. So
totally agree with you there.
Anyway, struggling with your mom's depression. Did it depress you? Did you end up depressed?
You know, people ask me that, right? So, and I've had conversations with folks in the neuroscience world. It's funny. I actually was like, really, I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was six months old. So I was like, oh, I'm adopted. I'm immune to this, right? Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think I had sad moments. I would never been diagnosed as depressed, like dealing with depression until last year when I was dealing with some major life events. But I had always found myself having those lulls, those sad moments. But, I think the thing that I learned from my mom was resilience, because even when she was crying uncontrollably for days, like I found a way to keep my head above water, right? So it's hard to be in a room with someone who's doing nothing but crying. And I just remember pulling myself up and really trying to focus on the positive. And that's just something that I learned. So I think that experience taught me resilience to like help myself bounce back when I was feeling those lulls, until last year when I had like this life event. And then I was just like, I had a therapist and I was really dealing with depression for the first time at 46 at the time.
When people talk about being depressed and sad, I mean, because everybody goes through some type of depression or sadness you can't go through life. If you do, you haven't been living. I mean, There's ups and downs, but I've always looked at the down points as a time to self-reflect. I've tried to take the positives out of it. It gives me time to slow down because I'm so high energy, and I'm always going and doing that. Those moments for me become points of self-reflection and self-examination and self-dealing with the things that I need to deal with to get my life, back so I can help others. So, that's kind of my view of that.
Yeah, I think the contrast is a gift because it also, amplifies things when they are good, right? When you have those lulls and you are able to navigate them and you slow down, like you said, and then, then life resumes and things are good, like you appreciate it. I don't know. I do. I appreciate it more in those moments.
Do you want to tell us or talk about your major event in your life?
Yeah, sure I can. I mean, a couple of things happened. So I got remarried after my first husband, and we were together for a very, very long time. We were together 19 years, divorced after 16 years of marriage, but we were together 19 years. So I was really dealing with that because you have to understand, as a little girl, I did not speak my truth. I did not speak my voice. So this is something that I continue to navigate with my therapist, even at my age. The importance of speaking my truth, the importance of speaking up if I am not happy, the importance of asking for what I want. I found myself in a marriage where I wasn't happy, but I was paralyzed in speaking that truth. So I finally mustered up the courage to speak up and say, this doesn't work for me. I'm not happy. And ultimately decided to end that marriage. So that was really hard because, that was a long piece of my life that I was having to, end. So that was really hard. I was dealing with that. And then I lost my job shortly thereafter. So I was separated. I was living in the same house with my ex. It was challenging. And then I no sooner get divorced legally and my position was eliminated. So there I'm dealing with two major life events, the end of a marriage and the end of my job. So that was really hard.
What was your job? What did you do?
Yeah, I spent 19 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and I spent the last 8 years in regulatory quality. So restructuring happens. My friend said to me, I'm amazed you were in the pharma industry 19 years and this is the first time you're experiencing this. And I'm like, all right, great. But it does. I mean, if that's something that has, become who you are, unfortunately, our jobs sometimes define a little piece of us. It shakes you. So definitely was a challenge to deal with both of those instances.
Yeah, I think our job, particularly more so maybe for men than women, men are defined by their employment and what they do and how they do it. So I think that's, a very true statement.
Mm-hmm.
After you ended up losing your job and ending your marriage and you went through this transition, what was the major point that got you through this whole process? How did you keep yourself sane and happy and going?
Yeah. You look at the areas of your life you have no control over, right? I didn't have control over a relationship. I didn't have control over my job. What I did have control over was my health and my well-being. And I knew that if I focused on taking care of my body and my well-being, that things would start to shift for me. So I threw myself into training for a triathlon. I just really took on my health and well-being and wanted to make sure that I felt as good physically as I could. I really do think that was what helped me and served me, because it gave me something to work on while I was navigating all the other emotions.
And plus it keeps your mind busy. When you're training and doing that, it keeps your mind off of what couldn't be and puts your mind on to what could be. So,
very true.
I noticed that people that go through transitions, one of the biggest benefits is to physically get active and help themselves pull themselves up. Mm-hmm. So you pulled yourself up out of this, and then what'd you start doing?
So this is all just in full transparency. This is all recent. So I dealt with my depression last year when I was separated, and I was just dealing with that. And then I legally was divorced a few months ago and then lost my job a few months ago. So this is all still pretty fresh. So the one thing that you will see is I launched my website, right? So when life turns, kind of gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And so one of the things I had always been doing for the past 2 years was I was really connected to wanting to remove stigma and, out in the world, whether it was in the workplace or within schools. So this really has given me the opportunity to get connected to wanting to bring change and make a real difference in the world. This was my side hustle, and this is something now that I really want to pursue full time. So therein lies the gift, right? As much as I was shook, I really am connected to wanting to bring change and help people understand mental health. So success without fulfillment isn't success, isn't joy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm up to really have, success and fulfillment and be a bigger contribution in the world.
And in the process, I know that you're doing work with CASA and helping others. Mm-hmm. Could you kind of tell us about what you're doing with that?
Sure. So a few years back, I had created a children's wellness program targeting middle school children, teaching them how to nourish their body and nourish their mind. I'd always been a lifelong volunteer for children. CASA was one of the court-appointed special advocates to just make a difference with underserved communities largely. So I created this wellness program, and it recently has evolved into a mental health fair that I'm bringing to middle schools, basically. It's a one-day fair. The children get a lot of great tools and have experiences to help them understand their emotions and their well-being, so they have the courage to raise their hand if they start to feel anxiety, depression, or whatever at that young age, because their feelings are just as real as ours. Mm-hmm. So I'm really committed to seeing that this program expands. Recently, I had the opportunity to present it at a Board of Education meeting, just the great work that the school has done around mental well-being, because I think, especially in the state of New Jersey, we don't have a mental health curriculum, that schools are required to teach, and until that day, we have a great opportunity to, bring something like this to kids so that they're empowered around their emotions and their well-being, because it's a stressful time as they go from middle school to high school and then high school to college. Let's shape their relationship to brain health now, Yep.
One of the things that I strive to do is, I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give a child is the gift of learning how to expect. The gift of expectation, because it is so rudimentary to our psychological being, but yet it's so overlooked because we have so many expectations every single day. We have societal, we have relationship expectations. We have school expectations. I mean, they have, parental expectations, and they have to know how to maneuver through those expectations in order to really be self-satisfied and happy. So that's one of the things that I do and try to work with on that.
That's awesome.
So you're doing some stuff with big sister and little brother kind of things. And
so what you're referring to, the CASA, the big brother, big sister, the Make-A-Wish.
I said, hold it. I said little brother.
Big sister, little brother. These are just the organizations that I found my passion for making a difference for kids. So those were organizations I was a part of growing up, throughout my adult years. Because I don't have children of my own, I always wanted to make a difference for them. So those were kind of the earlier volunteer opportunities that sort of set me up to want to create my own program for kids.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you have had children. I know that kind of personal, but No,
it's a great question. And until recently, I didn't really understand why, until I started to think about the roles were kind of reversed as a child. I really did take care of my mom. Maybe that's why I didn't want to have children.
No, it's an interesting thought. I mean,
Maybe.
So it was by choice that you had children. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I just remarried, just 8 years ago, 9 years ago.
Listen to how it sounds for you, right? You sound like a newlywed if you say I just and it's 8 years. That's great.
Well, it is. And when I met my wife, she was 10 years younger than me. So she was 53 and I was 63. And she hadn't ever had children, hadn't ever been married before. And one of the blessings that I have found in it is that I have 3 children and my wife loves my kids as if they were her own. And it's just such a great relationship, particularly that she has with my daughter. And, boys are be boys, but, they're good. They're affectionate with her and all that stuff. But my daughter's really close to her. And my granddaughters, I have 4 granddaughters. So they all just are. But there's, I guess my thought is that I think that when we're adults and we look back and we haven't had children, we look at it through a different lens than what I've experienced having raised children and everything. And, it just is, it's just a choice we make and we live with our choices and we get through it. But there is a joy in having that. But also I have a friend that is my age, which he's a year younger, he's 71. And he just adopted, he has no children, and he just adopted a 2-year-old boy. And he had adopted him because he has assets. He has a lot of assets, physical assets, and he had no one he could ever leave them to. Oh. And he wanted to leave his assets for somebody. But we talked yesterday and he said to me, Art, I never knew the joy of having another, because for years I've told him, adopt, Tom, adopt. And he finally did it. And it's just brought him such joy. So I'm going to encourage you to keep working with the kids because you'll find your joy in that.
Yeah.
You'll find
absolutely.
Your happiness in it.
Absolutely. And, for the record, I'm not opposed to dating a man with children. I love children. I absolutely do. It just never unfolded like that for me. So I get it. I can only imagine your friend's joy that he's experiencing. Yeah. What a gift.
Hey, guys out there, you hear that? She's very cute. I'll tell you right now, Michelle is cute as can be. She's got a great personality. So maybe I'm going to start Art's dating service and try to find Michelle a man.
You're sweet.
No, she is. She's very special. But let's get back to this show. When you look back and reflect back over your childhood, or let me ask this question first: is your mom and dad still alive?
No, they passed away. Yeah. Looking
back over it now, would you trade your experiences for a different life?
No. Nope. And I write about that in my book as well. I talk about how, there was definitely a lot of pain growing up, but it shaped who I am. And it's ignited this passion to make a difference in the world. In the back of the book, I have an epilogue where I share all of the things that my mom taught me that has made me a better person.
Can you share some of that?
Yeah, sure, sure. Like, deep empathy for someone dealing with mental illness, compassion, the resilience I mentioned before, the ability to see sunshine on a rainy day, that I had to learn how to do. Like, I think that above all, like, being around someone and feeling their energy and understanding, they may not be okay, and having that extra sense of empathy about me to check in with someone. Because I literally would absorb my mom's energy and I could feel it. So I was so tuned into her. So I think that the connections that I have with people, this insatiable hunger to want to make someone else's life a little less challenging and a little less painful, especially when it comes to acceptance of people with mental illness. Like, my mom was ashamed. She was embarrassed. Like, if I could have an impact on other people not being ashamed of who they are, I mean, like, how is my childhood not serving me if I'm out to do that,
It's a great way to look. I mean, I think it's the proper way to look at it, but it's a great way. But other people have taken adversities that you faced and turned them negative, and just let it bury them.
Don't know which direction you want your life to take? Are you sinking deep down into the pit of uncertainties day by day? So, what's the secret to leading a happy, satisfied life? It's taking matters into your own hands. But what if the matters in question are a total blur? Art Costello's Expectation Academy course aims to tell you exactly how you can get some clarity in your life. This course can be your savior on your journey to reinventing yourself. While you certainly can't plan your whole future ahead, you can definitely control twists and turns your life takes. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for this course now at expectationacademy.com. Get a chance to broaden your horizons and add meaning to your life. That's expectationacademy.com.
I want to ask you another crazy question that pops into this crazy head of mine. Caregivers can serve two purposes. I mean, they serve a lot of different purposes, but they can either become enablers or be empathetic. There's a big difference in being empathetic to somebody and then enabling them, enabling behavior. Did you feel at any point that you were enabling your mother's illness?
Mm-hmm. Sure. As a little girl, I mean, I was doing whatever I could to remember, the goal in the home was keep it as calm and even and keep her happy as you can make her. And I had this false belief that I had the ability to alter her mood, right? Because I would say something or make her laugh or whatever. So absolutely, when she was like paranoid that people were stealing her things and she, needed help, let's just look through all of this now and make sure that no one took anything out of the curio cabinet. Of course I enabled her. I pacified her. I didn't stand up and say, Mom, you're being ridiculous. I just did what I needed to do to keep her grounded. Like, that's what she wanted to do. I did it. There wasn't any hesitation. Now, as I got older, I started to learn what boundaries were because I started to go to a therapist, and I started to recognize that when she calls me relentlessly and she's crying after I've spent 5 hours with her because I'm leaving, that's not normal. And so if I was to enable her behavior, I would stay another 5 hours when I was visiting her. So I had to start to create those boundaries so that I was taking care of my well-being and I wasn't getting sucked into her illness. And I think that's the biggest message that I have for caregivers is, like, as much as you love your relative or your family member, like, you have to have boundaries and really take care of yourself first, because you can't take care of anyone if you're not taking care of yourself.
That was what I was thinking. If you're not well and healthy, right, you can't take care of anybody else. But you bring up something that I think is really, really important, is boundaries. Personal boundaries are really, really important to a person's well-being, because that gives you the time to take care of yourself. And I know it goes from person to person. It's all different. But how do you set up boundaries for someone who is so dynamic in their behavior as your mother was with her manic phases?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It was not easy. It was, absolutely met with upset. Absolutely. And I had to brace myself for that. So I remember my therapist saying to me, Michelle, for your own well-being, you have to distance yourself from your mother. So that means don't talk to her every day. Maybe talk to her at a specific time on a certain day, limit the time, because that's not good for you. Every day talking to her and letting her unload on you is not good for you. So I knew that I had to do that, and it was the hardest thing because I knew she was going to be even more irritated with me, and I would have to deal with that backlash. But I had to, and I did, and I started to almost recondition her expectations of me. At first it was like, oh, my daughter's abandoning me. I would be riddled with guilt and manipulation. And then, she started to appreciate the time that I did spend with her. But at first, it would have been very easy to not take that advice and just continue on. But at first, I knew it was going to be difficult, and it was. But I did it.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how difficult it would be, because if you've not ever been around somebody in the manic phase, it can get wild. Their thought processes just go. I mean, when you were saying going shopping and stuff, boy, I tell you what, I've seen what can happen with that, especially with credit cards,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a talk that I give. I'll be giving in New York in a few weeks for World Mental Health Day on 10/10. And a piece of the story is about the experience of being with mom when she was manic, going to the craft store. And it was like filling the cart with anything and everything. And hundreds and hundreds of dollars of materials later, and she's never going to touch it. It's going to sit in bags. It's going to sit in the living room, and she's never going to do anything with it. And I just remember my father just like freaking out at the expenses, sitting at the dining room table processing bills and going, you spent what? And that was just another reflection of the mania. And that's what she needed that day. And that's what she did.
Yeah, I know people that have gone out and bought $20,000 and $30,000 diamond rings and cars, and stuff during the manic phase, and then trying to figure out how to, husbands and wives trying to figure out how to, because manic depression and bipolar affects not only women, it's men and women both. That's a good question. Dealing with your mom, you may not be able to answer this, but it just had this thought about how different women are treated than men with bipolar. When I worked in mental health and we had men that came in with bipolar, they were treated different than the women with bipolar. I just had this thing go through my head, and wow.
How? So now I'm really curious. How were they treated differently? Because I only know how my mom was treated.
Yeah, I think men were treated differently in the sense that what they did was more accepted than what the woman did. And I'm just going through this in my head, and I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But when women went out and spent large amounts of money, it was not okay. But if a man went out and did it, well, he's got to pay for it mentality went in, and it became more acceptable. I'm only processing this as we're talking because I thought it. I also see, because the majority of psychiatrists that I worked with and for were males, their perspective of women affected how they treated the women and how men were treated. I'm just processing this all as we're talking, because it just dawned on me that the men were treated different. It was obvious when I'm looking back on it now. At the moment, I didn't think about it, was because I was involved in their care. But for instance, we had certain psychiatrists that if a woman came in and was manic, automatically ECT treatment, electroconvulsive therapy, or known as shock treatment. Women would get shocked much more faster than the men would ever. And sometimes the men would never get shocked.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm just processing this in my head as we're talking. And I'm thinking, how sad, how is a word I'm looking for? Misogynist? I don't know what it is.
Yes.
But I lost my wife to ovarian cancer.
Oh, wow.
I was married 38 years. And one of the things that I noticed in the medical community with that is her first oncologist was a male. And we stopped seeing him after a year and a half. And I took her to a female oncologist. The treatment between the female oncologist and the male oncologist to my wife was so blatant. Wow. It was sickening. The male oncologist absolutely flat out lied to her about diagnosis, about stages of cancer she had. And when we went to the female, she said, Art, had you come to me originally, I would have told you, you and Vicky go enjoy your life, because at her stage, it's only a 2% success rate. Would have changed the whole way we did everything. Would have changed how in our last, 3 years of her life would have went. We would have traveled. I would do anything, because I would have given her, and she gave me 38 years. She actually gave me 40, because I knew her for 2.5. But she gave me, all these wonderful years. And I left everything that I was doing at the time, my business and all that, to take care of her. We never had hospice. We never had any of that care. I cared for her for the last 3 years of her life. And I did it gladly, because I was so grateful for what she had done and done for me all the time. But my point of this whole thing is, males doctors treat female patients different. And I'm not saying all, but yeah, I would tell any woman to see a female gynecologist over seeing a male gynecologist, because they can empathize. Because I can remember when my wife would go to the gynecologist and he would tell her, oh, it's just a female thing. Yeah, your stomach's a little swollen and blah, blah, blah. And, it's just a female thing. And they'd recognize some of the things. And she had some issues that were really big trigger signs that doctors should have seen, but they didn't. They just kept on saying, oh, can't figure it out. Don't know what it is. It must be a female thing. And I literally cringe now when I hear my female friends say something about, how they get treated by male doctors. But I went off on a tangent and I didn't mean to. So, I just think there's a difference. There's a difference.
You saw it. Yeah. And when you see it in a loved one, that's hard.
Yeah. It is. But again, it is what it is. And we have to deal with it. And we have to be resilient. And we have lots of things to take care of. Besides them, we have to take care of ourselves.
And my mom did have ECT treatment, just to mention that to you. She had it quite a few times. And I remember that was the fix back then. When she was too nervous and upset and crying and shaking, they took her to Carrier Clinic, and that's where she had her treatment. And it did, pull her out of it. Yeah.
What ECT treatment does is it shocks your brain, and makes you very disoriented. It's like getting electrocuted.
I know. She was a zombie. My mom was a zombie when she came home. I would just be like, who is this woman?
Her brain cells were scattered. And then what the idea behind it is when they reform, you reform the person back into a better person, a healthier person, all that. What they didn't understand was the chemical makeup of bipolar. I had the pleasure of having a friend who was bipolar in college. And she went under a treatment that was done completely with B vitamins. I mean, massive doses of B vitamins. And it had an amazing effect on her. But yeah, she was great with these B vitamins. And then she would do the same thing that every bipolar patient does. They go and they say, I'm okay, and I'm not going to take these massive doses of these vitamins, and we'd have to deal with it again. Anyway, we've covered a lot of stuff and a lot of ground.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Actually, I'll give you as much time as you want to tell us any parting thoughts, any ideas, any things, what you're doing, where people can get a hold of you.
Sure.
And all that stuff.
Yeah. I think, we live in a world now where mental illness is being talked about more. And I do think that we are on a really great path. Unfortunately, we've had to lose celebrities to give this the attention it needs. I live in a community where my mayor is wanting to create a stigma-free town. I feel like we're on an amazing path, but we have a lot of work to do as well. So my goal, through my website and through my experience and through my programs, my website's michelledickinson.com. You can reach out to me there. I have a program for children, as I mentioned. I'd love to bring your middle school, wherever you are, to create more understanding around children's feelings and emotions and give them tools. I also have 2 years of great experience bringing an employee resource group to my company. I'd love to talk to more companies, have them understand what it takes to create a more compassionate workspace. Diversity and inclusion includes, physical disability, but it also includes invisible disability. And those are the mental illnesses that people struggle with. And they have to, wear the mask when they go to work. And wouldn't it be great if there was more empathy, compassion, and understanding for that group of people, that they felt included? So I'm out to make a difference in, communities and organizations and in schools. But if there's one thing I would like people to remember is something so simple as checking in with one another and just asking how you're doing can really make all the difference. We live in a world where we're virtual, where, we're not necessarily sitting next to someone as we used to in the workspace. A simple thing as extending yourself and just asking each other how you're doing, you'll really make a difference for someone. They may need to hear that someone cares. So that's what we can all do, every day, is just check in with the ones that we love and care for.
Eloquently stated. You did that beautifully. That really, really touches my heart, because our children and our young ones are our future and will always be our future. And how they grow up in this world that is so divisive right now, and so it just seems almost on a path of destruction that we're heading down. So imagine being 9 or 10 or 8 and trying to look at this world and seeing the bright part of it. Michelle, you're bringing the bright part of it to them, and I love you for it. And that's what's really important.
Thank you.
Boy, what a way to end a show. What a way. You so eloquently stated what so many people, I think and feel. So,
thank you.
With that being said, I thank you. My audience thanks you, and it's been a pleasure. And I can't wait to do this again with you and put my big old arms and hug you in person sometimes. So, because you're definitely a huggable person. And that's...
Thank you, Art. You're sweet. Thank you so much.
Everybody, that wraps it up for today. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the show. Drop us your comments and questions with what you want answered on the show. You can subscribe on iTunes and Binge Network. You can also get more information on the website, expectationtherapy.com.